Alicia.
Hi, Aditi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh my goodness, I'm so well and I'm so
Oh,
excited to
hold
talk
on.
to you.
Let me,
But you know what? I was
I think you're.
just thinking of
You're good. You're good. Your volume's
Oh,
up.
okay, cool. I was just thinking about how I slid into your DMs and I had this like shower thought about how like crypto Twitter feels a bit like being a kid on a playground, right? So, when you're a kid and you like go to a playground and if there's another kid on the playground, you're like, "Hey, can we be
I
friends?"
have to talk to
You
this
just like start.
person. 100%.
Yeah, and it just like makes sense and it's like really easy. You're like there and there's like no other threshold you have to get over. And so you're like,
Oh,
"Cool,
yeah.
yeah, let's be friends."
You're like,
And
let's
so
be
now I
friends,
feel
let's DM.
yeah.
And there you go.
Exactly. So now I feel like I'm just like on crypto Twitter. I'm like, "Hey, can we be friends?" Like I'm on the same playground like
Here we are.
um yeah. But I would love to know just because I feel like you are an OG in many ways. I don't know how you feel about that term. But I would love to know, like, in the first instance, like when you came into crypto with and were like exposed to blockchain stuff,
Mhm.
what was like your we're gonna make it moment where you were like, oh, stop, this is something, this is it. And then
Ooh.
kind of just like in this last cycle, um, I wonder if you've had kind of like any other moments that you're like, oh wow, now it means like this to me and this is what gets me excited. So hopefully you'll like give a little bit of context like along the way as much as you feel you want to. But I'd just like to know like how that journey has been for you since it's been like years.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been 4 years.
Wow.
Oh, 5 years.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
it's been 5 years. Started in the crypto space in
Mhm.
2016 on the reg tech side of things, where the tech, I mean, it just hadn't scaled. And
Mhm.
so the place that I was like, all right, this is where I could be useful was piloting kind of early business development at the central bank working level group, working with kind of early blockchain teams at Deloitte, IBM, the like. Um, at the time, I was still very just curious about the merits of the technology. I
Mhm.
think I had a just like an Aditi we're gonna make it moment when I
Yeah.
like chanced on this conference at Georgetown randomly, where I saw Vitalik talking to the sea of suits like bankers, so like Morgan Stanley bankers, Ernst and Young bankers, and he was like up there in like a pink shirt, cat shirt, and like lime green shorts, and I was like, oh my god, this is so crazy! Like I'd never seen anything like it, and he was completely commanding this room of like men in suits. And
Mhm.
um I had a minor like I think we're onto something moment.
Right.
It wasn't like the classic like we're gonna make it type moment you see on Twitter today every day, but I had that like initial moment internally, and so I was like, you
Mhm.
know what, I'm gonna work for no money, and I'm just gonna like try it out, and like whatever, we're young, like we can figure it out if it doesn't work out.
Mhm.
And since then, obviously the tech scaled, got into product management, chanced on consensus, which was really a ride of my life, like just
Yeah.
unbelievable. Um, Started there around like May 2017.
Mhm.
But more importantly, I think my time there was focused on obviously like a lot of the developer growth, the growth stuff that I'm working on today. But I did see a lot of just a lot of community efforts around just rallying and getting together. So
Mhm.
the first kind of I went to the Prague DevCon in 2018, and a lot of those conversations were just people in like conference t-shirts talking about how to make certain UX improvements on the technology, or talking about how to improve certain protocol improvements on Ethereum, and just like gather and talk. And I think
Mhm.
that was another gonna make it moment, because I just saw the community get together in such genuine ways where truly
Yeah.
there was, I mean, 2018, 2018 Ethereum was doing well, but before that, like really there wasn't a lot of awareness or interest in this, and
Hmm.
it took a lot of convincing, right? Like advocacy from the regulatory perspective, but also from the like, let's go talk to Ernst and Young about this. Like, I don't know, and that was really kind of a we're going to make it motivational moment in my life, because I just saw a lot of passionate, smart people in one room,
Hmm.
really interested about something when the rest of the world was not paying attention.
Yeah.
Of course, you see that today where the whole world is paying attention. You have people, selling NFTs for $69 million, and you have, DJs getting into this, like Blau and
Yeah.
Steve Aoki. But I still think we're going to make it. Obviously, we're going to make it. But
Hmm.
some of those early moments in my career where there was really no glitz and glamour, we were selling ETH to like pay for our rent. I think those were the moments where I felt like we're gonna make it, just because of like the people. And I know that's
Yeah.
cheesy. Um, uh,
No.
yeah, so that gave me a lot of confidence. Of course, there's great people in the space today, but those early moments really fuel kind of my passions in crypto today.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this a lot in terms of the people in the community, and everyone always says like I've never worked around such incredibly intelligent people, and I think it's just like it has this like factor because of it's like a typical corporate byline, but I really feel
So
like when
basic.
you're in crypto,
Hmm.
you're like, wow, no, this is really something, and I think it would be hard to find someone who didn't acknowledge that it is the people that makes this space so incredible and inspires so many people to kind of make that transition from wherever they are in the world more
Hmm.
into crypto. And so I wonder, like, after that kind of 2017-18 cycle, this like kind of, I would say, like end of 2020 2021 cycle, which has been wild. Like, has that been wild for you? Or are you like, oh no, this seems about right?
Oh man, it has been wild. I mean, NFTs, DAOs, these things
Hmm.
were talked about in 2017, 2018. I mean, NFTs 2015 even.
Wow.
Um, and it was really hard to get people to pay attention.
Hmm.
And now I think we're in a position of market maturation and obviously a lot more awareness in terms of like banks having like OTC desks set up for these assets. And so we're in a completely different phase of just like the market being ready. But
Yes.
seeing people transition from their careers, from their FANG job, from their Airbnb job to join crypto is, yeah, it's truly what mass adoption looks like.
Hmm.
It gets me excited, but it's also like, wow, we're at this point. Like I have a lot more friends working in crypto that
Hmm.
or a lot more friends that hit me up and are like, "Hey, like how do I get involved?" And I'm like, "Oh, great. You got to try out, this grants program. You got to try out Rabbit Hole, shout out Rabbit Hole." But yeah, like I think the flurry of texts that I get today with friends that are interested in this stuff versus, back in the day when I was like, this is a real job, I promise, is drastic. And so
Yeah.
it's a great feeling. It's just wild to know that we've come this far as a community. It's incredible.
Yeah, completely. And so I wonder, in terms of like this onboarding aspect and like what your role is now, and like what does your day to day look like now? Because I feel like you are one of those people who I'm so glad that so many people are hitting you up that are new to the space, and they're like, help me. I feel like if I could put like one person at the gates of the metaverse,
Oh
it
my
would be
god.
you.
Oh my gosh. That's such a compliment. Wow. I love that.
um,
Thank you.
yeah. So what does day to day look like for you?
Yeah, so currently hired at Edge and Node, building on the graph to think about developer growth and kind of top
Hmm.
of funnel initiatives that convert Web 2 developers to Web 3 developers in a product management role. Um, Part of my day to day is the typical product management sprint planning type
Hmm.
of setup. But I think what gets me interested in this kind of work is the domain of, hey, how do we like get people to interact with the protocol and actually reduce friction points? And so I was formerly part of the original team at consensus that pushed out the Coursera Blockchain Foundations course to date that has some 50,000 something students.
Wow.
Also, that team put out one of the first kind of end-to-end technical boot camps for people to learn about dApp development, and there was a flurry of use case specific courses there as well. All of that and my work today is really surrounded. So my experience and my work today is really surrounded around, what are the friction points and implications of onboarding, and how do I make that easier for developers in the space? I tend to think a lot about identity and UX. And so in the past, I've worked on an interactive login mechanism for one of our technical 101s that leveraged Alex Van de Sand's universal login, otherwise known as uni logins. And that design pattern didn't require passwords. It just backed up, a private key. And from a user perspective, it was very similar to the patterns that Web2 native people kind of see with 2FA. And so effectively, it could mean like a device could generate a private key and then request authorization to add that key as one of the signers to an identity with some permissions around it. And that was, functionality that I think was really seminal in 2018, 2017, because it was a simpler design pattern that people could use in dApp development. And similarly, I think today, I try to reflect on kind of past analogs of things we were trying to solve around this kind of user experience onboarding realm, and think through ways to kind of bring those things and those themes to kind of the problems we're seeing today. Yeah.
Yeah. And so with onboarding, I feel like identity is the first step. And because identity isn't straightforward in Web 2 like it is with Web 3, you're not just like, here is my email, my phone number, my credit card, and I'm away.
Yeah.
And, identity is a whole piece. And I feel like it's almost kind of the foundation of Web 3 in the sense that you really, really have to have a good understanding of what identity means in Web3 and how it's different, and also where it might be going, because I feel like we are maybe just starting to kind of scratch the surface of all of these composable aspects of identity and kind of the difference between on-chain and off-chain, all that sort of stuff, which I'd love to talk to you about. And I just wonder, how do when you're talking to people in Web2 or developers who don't have experience in Web3, how do you kind of communicate the importance of identity?
That's such a loaded question.
Sorry.
No, I love it. So I think the first thing to navigate in a lot of these situations is the jargon. Authentication as a word is weird. When actually anyone hears that, it's kind of scary. I don't want to authenticate my wallet. That, I don't know what that means. And that's effectively what you're asked to do on all of these applications when you authenticate with MetaMask, right? There's been countless user interviews where we, take people through the flow of how to build a subgraph, and they're like, why would I authenticate my wallet that has funds in it to to this random website that I'm apparently testing? And it's a very valid question. And I think first, the jargon of that is complex. What does that mean? How's your wallet really the face of your identity? And then it's the second learning, which is your wallet is your identity. That on-chain activity is how you represent yourself in a variety of contexts. And that is how people interact in Web3, and it's considered a primitive at this point. And I think that's another barrier, friction point in the space, which is why I'm going to of course talk about universal logins and talk about the Ethereum login now. With the universal login, that was really interesting because you could just with what we built, which we happened to demo at South by Southwest. It was a great experience alongside UT Austin, which is cool for some of our early beta testers. The major feedback point was yeah, this is cool, but there's, what does this mean in the context of actually onboarding? Is storing private keys in a browser really safe? Haha, it's not. Surprise, surprise. And what does that mean in the context of interaction with a dApp, right? And I think that's what a lot of today's like play to earn, like the education space, the onboarding space is really thinking about. Can your on-chain identity represent the things you've done in the space? And I think that's something to really help end users understand. But the other kind of behavioral pattern we're seeing, which is you're probably familiar with this, people have multiple wallets and people use multiple wallets in different contexts, and certain wallets obfuscate certain actions and others don't. And you can pick and play and choose what wallet you use in what context to represent your actions. And so I think alongside the like helping people understand like, hey, here's the terminology, here's the tooling and the primitive, and then here's the behavioral elements associated with the primitive. I think all those three
Right.
things kind of interact and add to kind of the friction points in helping people understand like, hey, here's how to use this thing and here's what your identity means in this context.
And I wonder just like that idea of friction with onboarding, whether it is a feature or a bug, in terms of talking about access and trying to onboard versus like people really having enough context to understand kind of the weight of what it means every time they log into their wallet in a dApp and authenticate. So how do you think about just like friction and access?
Yeah. So I guess from the growth perspective, you're also navigating the trade-off between quality and quantity, right? You could
Totally.
you could effectively give people a ton of wallets and say like, okay, bye, like go do whatever you need to do, and maybe like educate them a little bit on like, here's how to use a wallet. But there's this element of quality where you need to ensure that what people are doing with the wallets and how they're interacting with their identity in a certain Web3 context actually lines up to like good quality actions, or like even like healthy and not malicious actions on a protocol. So I think quality and access is hard because of course I want to take this like driver's license approach to Web3, where I say, okay, great, like you just have to pass you just have to pass this test and you have to meet these standards of like what you need to know. And that works really well, but you sometimes get really bad drivers. And similarly, you're going to get people that pass, but don't necessarily have the like, know-how or understand things in the right context to actually engage with some of these like Web3 things in a meaningful way. And so I think it's a question. I don't think I have an answer, but it's something that I think is worth navigating based on some of these trade-offs that I mentioned.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting, even just like talking about like this driver's license mechanism, and also what I've seen like emerge, especially with this NFT craze, which is this idea of like gated communities or kind of like gating access to things. Yeah, around, I would say, like NFTs and DAOs in particular over the last couple of months. And I wonder just like if there is anything on your mind when you think about like access, and I know this is kind of taking a detour, but just like how this works. Like, is the idea in your mind that the space is big enough for so many communities, and that just means that we do have more of them that are more kind of niche, and therefore they become like exclusive in one way or another, or like, do you think that kind of thinking about the like underlying values of the space, that that many things should retain this like idea of like open access always? I don't know. This is just like something that is kind of like every time I go on Twitter or every time I'm in Discord, I keep seeing this, and I have no haven't come to any conclusion, but it's certainly something that I think about and I'm thinking about more, and I'm sure lots of people in this space are. So just wondering if you've kind of noticed that and how you think about it.
Yeah, that's also another loaded question. I love it though.
I think that's like the only way to ask questions, like make them super loaded and
Make them
you just
super
like
spicy. No, I love it. So Okay, so I think naturally every community is going to have its in group and out group, whatever that means, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the context of demonstrating value and skills, from the lens of identity and who you are and how you're represented in a space, um, there's this concept of like learning by doing, right? Like proof of resume
Mm-hmm.
comes up a lot.
Yes.
And the thing that I mean, I promise I'll answer the question, but there's a winded like response to this.
Cool.
Proof of resume comes up a lot, but I always think about, what prevents the spray and pray situation from happening. Someone has 10 wallets, 9 of them are
Mm-hmm.
trash and demonstrate really bad skills. One of them is okay. And that's the one they end up
Mm-hmm.
using as their resume, right? Like right now, there's nothing preventing people from doing that. And
Right.
so is that really a way we want to verify someone's skill set or actions a la on chain when they can effectively have multiple identities associated to various actions on a network or a protocol? I don't know. Um, the the other thing that adds to some of this thinking is like, of course, this like driver's license analogy, right? Like you're meeting a
Mm-hmm.
set of standards, and attest to those standards in some like play to earn quest thing. Um, is that okay? And will that diminish quality, kind of like the driver's license like analog, where you are going to have some bad drivers, and like that's just the way it is.
Right.
Um, the other axis point in this whole kind of question around this in-group out-group thing is play to earn is also like a really interesting evolution. So crypto zombies was huge when it came out because it taught
Mm-hmm.
people to learn solidity in a fun and engaging way. And I think that's obviously a trend with most education, but also in particular crypto education, given like the kinds of people it attracts. People aren't
Definitely.
going to learn passively via a course, they're going to learn actively via doing. And like that is truly like from a pedagogical perspective the way that people learn the best.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in terms of like your question and this like, will there always be an in-group out-group? How do you kind of parse through that via on-chain actions and identity? I think learning by doing is one thing, but it's important to maintain the merits of curriculum defined objectives that
Mm-hmm.
comes from traditional pedagogy, right? And I think there is space to bring it back, especially under this like, $4 billion DAO age of financing projects and governing communities.
Yeah.
Um, in particular, I personally think there's space to own the narrative space around spreading standards or expectations to a community,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's DAO governed or not, through a computational combination of on-chain actions, a
Mm-hmm.
quest to demonstrate, your skills, and a social element of who you're associated to in the community. And I think this like combination of like it's a matrix, right? You're
Right.
assessing legitness based on a matrix of things, which is like naturally how we make decisions, but also how I think a lot of other projects in various verticals are thinking about this. So like governance, DAO
Mm-hmm.
governance space is thinking about a combination of reputational elements. And I think it's the same for education and growth and learning, right? You're melding this combination of behavioral and social reputation, which you see in a traditional university today. There's a societal norm around the social cachet of where you went to school, who you're
Mm-hmm.
associated with, what you did or what you studied, and how you're using those learnings a la your job resume or your experience in a job market. And so that's kind of how I think about the typical evolution of this space and how I think we can prevent, hopefully, this like in-group out-group thing from happening via like this matrix computational approach to reputation, which of course like I have a couple of ideas, but like I'm in no way the people kind of driving the research and efforts around this. So yeah, just that's I think that's my take.
Yeah, I wonder if, as well, just in terms of like the timeline of where we are on development of these ideas, whether,
Mhm.
through like a capital expense, like spending Ethereum or and buying tokens and things like that. That's just like where we are in terms of
Right.
on the journey of participation and engagement and things like that. But I can definitely see that once we kind of have the tools to build out and like really acknowledge, I think as well, not only on-chain interactions and activity, but also off-chain data and activity. So what does, I feel like there is that off-chain space I don't think is being utilized right now. You know how at the moment, like everything is on-chain, like every little thing you do is on-chain. And I wonder, like, how do you think about it?
Oh my God. First off, shout out to the ceramic team because I love them dearly. They're also ex-Consensus colleagues, and shout out Senna and Danny Zuckerman. But yeah, I mean, this team is actively thinking about off-chain data and the importance of it in the context of reputation and identity. Like, for instance, DIDs, they're my decentralized identifiers are like probably my favorite primitive right now. But really, it's a way to kind of append a like Web 2 adjacent identity to a Web 3 wallet, which is how we think about identity today. I think there is an interest and a movement towards kind of exploring off-chain identifiers, especially in a multi-blockchain world, which is that actually is something that was very different for me given my time in crypto. Like, I think early, like, 2016, 2017, there was very much an ETH maxi attitude to everything, where it was like Ethereum is this like prevailing blockchain, like every other blockchain is silly. It has the most developers working on it. It has the most attention, and it has the most, after some time passed, it had the most like enterprise attention as well. And so like this is the blockchain that makes sense. And now we're seeing that like, well, that's not the case. There's potentially different blockchains for different contexts, and they can be equally, if not more, successful. And so, yeah, and so I think like decentralized identifiers and having a way to maintain your identity and reputation in this like consistent layer is important, and it's actually becoming more and more salient as we're progressing towards a multi-blockchain future. But like taking a step back, I think we see the progression of some of these ideas, in particular with so like Vitalik at ETC talked about this like Ethereum login, right? Again, it reminds me a lot of the Uni login project because there was a lot of drive to minimize friction in the user onboarding perspective, and simplify this concept of identity. And like we're still thinking about it today, clearly with Vitalik's talk. The nuance and the context around the problem has of course changed, but I think like identity is a core part of how we make onboarding easier, and off-chain identifiers appended to on-chain actions is like critical to really making that experience seamless. Related from the education angle, back in the day, there was a lot of talk of certifications on the blockchain.
Right.
Get certified on the blockchain. Oh my God, put it on your LinkedIn, blah. And link to like a hash, right? Consensus was famously thinking about that problem. So were a variety. I have this like crazy sheet from like 2017 with like random education companies like Odom.io, Open Source University, Skillchain. Like a lot of people were thinking about this because they were like, how do I represent a student and the actions they took, and how do I verify that their actions were legit? And the questions, like how do you prove you have a skill in something was really like the core question that these companies were trying to figure out, and so were we. What that didn't solve for was proving or verifying that a person actually knows something before granting them like this accolade or certificate, right?
Right.
Today you go on like Udemy, Udacity, whatever, and it's like a sea of content, and you're like, I don't know which one to take, and like like you look at LinkedIn and like there's a dozen certifications swirling around everywhere, and just because someone is certified in something off of Udacity or whatever doesn't really mean that they like know the thing until you talk to them and actually have them like do a task. And so I think the emergence of the play to earn, play to demonstrate movement and the on-chain resume efforts are also a similar kind of analog to the login onboarding stuff where like we're still thinking about the same problem, just in a different context with different kind of nuances. And I think it's just a testament to the fact that the problems in the space stay the same, and it just evolves as the market evolves, which is like a blasé takeaway, but I think it's important for the purpose of this conversation. And so when I think of like off-chain identity, it is very much a trend that we're thinking about, in particular with this like, looming future of multi-blockchain world. And so, yeah, so I think there is movement towards that.
Yeah. Just thinking about this idea of like a resume, and how now I've seen so many people on Twitter just creating projects and kind of using more proof of work to demonstrate their skills. Like you said, less about certifications and more about really demonstrating kind of real world application of knowledge. And I wonder if this is just like an interesting progression, because so many of us are technology based, and what we do, kind of no matter what our kind of path of employment is or our profession is, and so we can just do everything on online. And just like this idea of CVs and things like that, like I can imagine there are so many educational institutions and platforms, Web2 platforms like LinkedIn, who are so desperate to hold on to this idea of certification. But like when you really like look at the reality and kind of maybe are just like more pragmatic about it in terms of like how hiring happens in crypto, like in a very crypto native way, it might be, I mean, like we're seeing this kind of with Loot at the moment, that just this NFT project that just got dropped, and all these Loot derivatives that are literally popping up overnight, like in 12 hours. It's blowing my mind. And
Yeah.
and so I wonder, if someone has proof of work, this idea, it's so layered though, because I can see like what you're saying even before about this like spray and pray idea, where you have like many wallets, but you're like, oh no, this is a wallet that is associated with this thing that I've done. It gets really complicated. It's almost like I feel like we just got to this like stage with employment in this, I don't know, I feel like it's like between the Industrial Revolution and like before the like knowledge revolution, or whatever this is, the space that we're in now, where we're like, these are people, they are humans, they have passports, they can have CVs, like they have a single identity. This is how we do life. And now I just feel like it's getting
Flat,
blown
right?
wide open.
Yeah. So if you look back to the like roots of today's education, I'm like a nerd. I like read about this for fun. I don't have any sort of background in this, so if any of this information is wrong, like please call me out. But the roots of today's like education system can be traced back to like the Industrial Revolution, right? Like we had just transitioned from like agriculture-based economies to one largely characterized by manufacturing at scale. And like, holy shit, that was huge. And while the workforce of the past had been, typical agrarian society members, farmers, artisans, people that were working individually on their schedules or in small groups, this new workforce kind of was operating in large factories and was expected to be, punctual, like on time, sober, ready to go. And on this like, 9 to 5, whatever bullshit schedule we've made up. And that translated to the system of education that we quickly know today, where students are grouped by age, you 12 years of whatever, like mandatory institution and instruction, and you're at this like regimented pace for everyone. And I think the school of thought is that, this came to be because the education system grew out of this need to train a future workforce to be compliant and efficient. And that's kind of known as like this factory model of education. But it doesn't really like paint the full picture, right? Because there's a lot of other ways to learn outside of this like regimented 9 to 5 schedule. You can clearly learn by doing. I mean, there's countless research that's actually a better way to learn, where you're actively engaged in a problem rather than sitting down and passively like taking it in when you're grouped by age. And so I think crypto education learning is kind of going beyond this analog of like one-dimensional representation of skills where, okay, it's your school, it's who you know, it's what you study, job. Um, that's really being like ripped at the seams where it's like, oh no, well, like you can build a project on Solana and like build a project on Ethereum and like Allah did, like here you go in your wallet, like you can demonstrate that you can do these things. And I think that's where this like model of certification is really being questioned, because like what does a certification really mean? Like I can get certified on Adobe like Photoshop via Udemy, but like does that mean I can, work as a graphic designer in a job? Like probably not. And so yeah, I think we're in a really unique period of time where some of these like educational models are really being rethought. And of course, you're seeing like the MOOC companies like Coursera, Lambda School, like obviously like doing very well. But I think now we're also questioning that. Like, is that really the model that we should be, educating our future generation on? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I wonder in terms of just thinking about crypto education and then zooming out just to education and learning in general, because I feel like a lot of my experience was that I went through a lot of schooling and I, did a double degree and spent like 5.5 years at university to get out into the workforce and to not feel any more equipped than I would have. I probably could have just done like a 3-month internship and felt as prepared to do the job as a graduate.
Really?
And so just like rethinking this idea of learning, and like when you come into the space, DYOR, like do your own research. And for the first time, I feel like the incentives are like very intrinsic for you to genuinely like seek out knowledge and to learn, whether it's by doing or even if it is like through transmission, but kind of like it's like willing, right? You're not just like being forced to sit and take in information, like you are seeking it out. And so it sticks in a different way. But I wonder in terms of like thinking about education and learning going forward, how, if like certifications and kind of traditional institutions were to just like drop off the face of the earth and you could start from scratch, like how would you think about like not training someone, but like I guess just like creating this culture of lifelong education and learning in a person? And obviously this question is like this question is so I can go and like literally take whatever you say and like apply it to my daughter because I would love to know how you think about this, especially because you are like a self-professed nerd and you clearly like love like learning seems, whatever is the opposite of a chore, like it seems like a joy to you to learn. And so I wonder just like based on how you have been learning over the past couple of years, like how would you think about rolling that out for other people?
Your question. Well, I think in the case of me, I'm like intrinsically motivated by the space. Because it's like one of the only things I know. I tell my friends this, like it's one of the things I'm very sure about in my life. There's a lot of things I question, like where I live, like the city I'm in, blah blah blah. But like this is one of the things that I'm like very sure about.
Right.
So I think there's intrinsic motivation just from like I have really believed in this technology for a long time, and of course, like I truly believe in the tenets of it, and I think that it can really power a self-sovereign financial world full stop. And a lot of it is driven by like just general resentment around the ultimate shitcoin, the dollar, right? And so, but that's like me. That's me. But I think in terms of future communities, of course, like there's this concept of like, how do you drive intrinsic motivation in people to like do the thing? And for a long time, like Khan Academy, MOOCs were like, oh, we're going to open source our content, like make it free, but have people, because there's a traditional 2010, SaaS companies. And so they had to make money because they're all like VC backed companies. And so they were like, okay, great. The business model, the like SLAs, service level agreements for students is going to be, yeah, you can learn this content for free and just like take the course. or you
Mhm.
can learn it and pass an exam and get a certificate,
Mhm.
via paying for it. So you pay like $50 on Coursera to get certified in whatever art history, random.
Mhm.
Um, and like that's the value prop of paying for a certification. And you know, the intrinsic motivation there is like, I really want the certificate so I can like put it on my LinkedIn and like get a job.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know, like today, I don't think like, I think now people are realizing like, oh, just because you have like whatever or a certificate doesn't necessarily mean you can perform well in a job or you actually care about the thing.
Mhm.
Um, which is where I think there's a lot of value in this like play to earn model, but maintaining this like pedagogical approach of like, okay, well, you still have to meet these standards, right? And
Mhm.
so I think you're naturally seeing that with like the DAO community. Admittedly, do not know too much about the DAO community, but you're seeing that in the DAO community where there's certain guidelines and like governing elements that you have to abide by to participate and partake in the DAO. Um, and I think again, like having this element of like, okay, you can enter the DAO or you can like, you know, have these permissions if you meet this like computational combination of good reputation in the DAO, which is, you
Mhm.
know, a combination of your skills, who you know in the community. Like, are you friends with other people that know what they're doing on the protocol? Okay, great. Do you interact with them? You know, are you linked on Twitter? Are you following each other on Twitter? You know, like let's
Mhm.
verify that via your did. Um, but I think, yeah, the combination of like on-chain actions, you know, demonstration of skills via quests or certain things that you achieve on the protocol, and like who you're associated with might give you a better picture of like how involved a person is in a certain like space. Um,
Mhm.
and might also give you certain trust cues on like how genuinely intrinsically motivated they are. I think the problem with a lot of like online communities traditionally, like, you know, as a Slack community, right,
Mhm.
it's really hard to measure a lot of that via Slack, via text-based interactions. But when you have something like you know, a ledger backend, blockchain backend, these things are immutable, they're permanent, and you can constantly refer back to them. And so I think that permanence is really helpful in this use case. But also the combination of like various facets of reputation from like the behavioral standpoint and the social standpoint could help kind of suss out who's really interested and engaged and intrinsically motivated to learn about something.
Mhm.
And of course, I think standards and maintaining that of like, okay, well, you should still be able to do like XYZ is important and something that comes from traditional like pedagogy that I think should be maintained.
Mm. And so when you think about standards with your product manager kind of like brain switched on, what does standards mean to you? And like how would we roll this out as like kind of speaking to someone with no context for maybe even what a standard is at like a cultural level or like an ecosystem level? Um, and yeah, like how would you kind of roll that out if you could like send out a tweet and be like, this is the protocol for standards and everyone's going to listen to me and we're going to get it done.
Yeah. So I think process is never taken well if it's like shouted at you. So like, do this. It's like, no, I don't want to. Like, why would I want to do that? Right? Or like, go clean your room. Like, no, mom, I don't want to. Bye. Um, that's like never taken well. And I
Mhm.
think process is usually adopted more seamlessly when it's demonstrated, right? And
Mhm.
it's demonstrated and you articulate like, this is why this went really well. Um, it's like when you reflect back on like a really positive experience, you're like, oh yeah, like I did, you know, this was switched up in my routine, whatever, and this like really worked. And like, I guess I'm gonna just adopt it and roll with it for the future. And
Right.
so when I think of standards in the context of um, education, helping people understand what's what, I do think there's merit in demonstrating that in a smaller context first
Mhm.
before, you know, saying, hey, this is what you have to do, full stop.
Mhm.
which in the traditional product management context is like, okay, you're going to do like an alpha test and you're going to test it out with a couple of people and
Right.
internally, and then you're going to do a beta test, and then you're going to test it out with a couple of people externally, and then you're going to roll it out and see what happens. But I think, like, of course, like taking a phased approach is critical, but also leading with influence, like I said, is another thing that is, I think, really works in, especially in the like product management function. And so the approach for standards, I mean, I think that needs to be combined with, so like traditionally, like bootstrap to something that's already working really well in the space. And I think making an argument for it, this is why this has worked. And this is
Right.
why these people who have met these standards are getting XYZ,
Mm-hmm.
or demonstrate knowledge of XYZ, I think are all great ways to model that this could work. Again, this is like my thesis after, working on this for a while and thinking about education. I like literally have like old spreadsheets of market intel from like 2017 with like old like educational companies like based in Bulgaria. And I was like, how are they doing this? Like what, why a token for like skills? Like it didn't make sense. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, this is a theory, but I think like obviously like testing everything in a very controlled environment and doing it in phases, but also leading with influence on top of an existing community that has a lot of this working, is kind of the way to go. I think with crypto, another like we're gonna make it moment is like everything is an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes.
Everything is an experiment, and you make friends along the way. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the best part. And so, really leaning into this idea of building in public and learning in public is what I love.
Mm-hmm.
Because like we've all made mistakes, we've all whatever, like, not known how to use a protocol, or like had a really dumb question at, or felt like the
Mm-hmm.
dumbest person in the room at one point in our lives in the
Mm-hmm.
space, especially in the space. But there's a lot of merit in owning your experiments and owning
Mm-hmm.
the um, risks and rewards of your experiments. And so I think that's another, like, we're gonna make it, because I've always been that person where it's like, okay, I tried it out and like I don't like it. Like, okay, done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I really resonate with this idea that everything is an experiment in crypto, and that's definitely how I kind of take action. I feel like this idea that things need to scale really complicates things. And so, even just like, say the idea of an experiment, which is like, say you were having like a dinner party, not a dinner party, but just like making dinner for
Mhm.
like you and two others, and you're like, okay, I'm going to try this recipe out. It's a bit wild because I'm also mashing in like this recipe and that recipe and just some random thoughts. This could go really well, or it could be like we're ordering pizza for dinner. But they're like, do you know what I mean? They're kind of like on board with it. They know where you're at, and it's fine. There is this understanding. But if you were to say, okay, I'm going to have a dinner party for like 40 people, you can't, like, that, yeah, just like that spirit
Mhm.
kind of is naturally diminished, and the
Totally.
ability to get everyone onto the same page and to be open to that level of experimentation really diminishes quite quickly when you start to scale things. And so I wonder, just in terms of like thinking about innovation in crypto and where, uh, we are expanding the space, which I still think like in a lot of ways comes from the fringes. How do you think about like innovation and the way in which it happens? Like, is it literally, in your experience from what you've seen, like a few people kind of coming together to do something, or do you think that it's reasonable to expect that it could be, DAOs with like a couple hundred people, and this idea of collective intelligence comes into play? Or I don't know, it just like seems kind of interesting. I wonder
Mhm.
how we bake this in, and if it's possible to scale it in the culture.
Yeah. Always the questions. No, you're good. So I think this all is rooted back to the ethos of open source
Mm-hmm.
attitude, right? Like you look back to open source software, and a lot of it is based on collective intelligence, collective voting, collective uh, software improvement proposals. There's discussion, there's democratic processes to um, refine an idea, and push it out to a community.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that naturally happens in the space. There's, subculture to crypto where people are going to tweet out a Substack link with their recent thesis, and people are going to comment on it in your replies. Or the culture of, hackathons is so prevalent in crypto, where people are constantly hacking and people are constantly judging these hackathons and providing feedback. There's also this like meta culture of Discord. Like, you can effectively get a job by just popping into a company's Discord and asking good questions. It's happening,
Totally.
right? And so I think to say that a lot of this is happening in a vacuum would be false, because it's not. There's so much cultural context to this space where
Mm-hmm.
things are done collaboratively, things are done iteratively, and things are done in working groups. And I think that speaks to how collective intelligence is most definitely a thing in the space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, you think about religion, and I can't help but wonder, like, will DAOs replace religion? Like, I don't know. I think there will be a movement towards communities that think in a similar way and are making
Mm-hmm.
decisions on behalf of each other in a form. Um, it's not to say that it's going to be in this DAO format or whatever, but I think there is a definite movement towards like um, synergetic thinking and building. And I think it's very kind of within the ethos of open source software to like learn and iterate in public as well as building in public, which is scary. It's like totally a scary thing, because you are like, wait, I don't know anything about this. Like, can I like admit my mistakes? Like, that feels so like shameful.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that's where like this old education system is so phased out, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
in the traditional education system, you're penalized for your mistakes, you're docked
Totally.
points, you're docked reputational like cachet in your friend
Mm-hmm.
group or whatever the case may be. But in this space, you're not. It's actually kind of looked at as a positive if you're able to own kind of your story and the
Mm-hmm.
fuck ups you had. And so I think yeah, I think that's that yet again another like we're gonna make it moment where I'm like, yeah, this traditional model of work education,
Mm-hmm.
learning is so dated, and like there's literally no other space I would consider working in, because it's like I just don't believe in it. Kind of very rooted in my beliefs and in the ethos of the space and how it operates and how people are engaging and interacting with the protocols.
Yeah. I wonder, just kind of tugging on this this open source thread and thinking about kind of like public goods. And I know Vitalik and Optimism just like wrote a piece recently about retroactive funding and things like that. And I wonder, just in terms of like this ability to work and build in public, and uh, how you think about like maybe like the privilege associated with taking a risk like that. And I think this kind of comes back in some way to what we're talking about with, CVs and LinkedIn and jobs, which is that like everyone really is like the way that you solve this is for people to have an income. And so for many people, that means to have an income through employment. And for kind of a few people, but I feel kind of like proportionately more people in the crypto space, it means to start a project or a protocol and kind of to find funding and things like that. But something I kind of think about is just like this, I don't know, is there like a privilege that exists with like having the freedom to learn to build without having an income of sorts and things like that? And what do you think about that?
Totally. I think it is such a privilege to know about to even know about this technology,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to interact with it in the ways that we do today, where
Mm-hmm.
I have an immediate Twitter community I can tap into. I have a vast net. Most of my friends are in crypto. Sad, but very sad, but it's fine. A vast network of people that I can tap into for advice or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
like navigating stuff in my life. It's so privileged. I talk to my friends that aren't operating in crypto, and they're like, "What? You're going to Paris for a conference? Like what? That like it
Right.
it's a like educational privilege to even know about this technology because it's so
Hmm.
niche, it's so coveted now, it's so specific. It
Hmm.
means you have access and ability to actually like spend time learning about this and get involved. Um, yeah, like I think there is a privilege element uh, associated to it, and the other thing that I think is associated to it is like the privilege of the social connection. So like as adults,
Right.
like it's really hard to make friends. If I didn't have this community, like I really don't know how I'd meet new people. Um,
Totally.
right? Like I don't know. I guess I'd go to like a workout. Like I don't even know. I'm not even sure how I would meet friends or like new people. And it's really kind of nice to have a community that you can tap into, become friendly with. And I will say like most of the people operating this space are highly educated and
Hmm.
highly knowledgeable. And so just the privilege of having these social connections and being able to interact with these people on a day-to-day basis is yeah, it's a huge it's like a I'm so lucky, I'm so grateful.
Hmm.
But it's I recognize that it's, not the situation that my other peers are in or
Hmm.
yeah, my other, unrelated colleagues are in.
Hmm. It's so funny, like just thinking about this idea of like the privilege that we have to be in this space. I remember walking out of the movie theater when I watched the movie in 1917, I think it was,
Mhm.
that like one shot movie about yeah, these boys at war and their journey, and thinking, I just remember being like so overwhelmed that like I didn't have to go to war in my lifetime, or like for well at least for me, like where I am based at the bottom of the world, and I just imagine like saying goodbye to like husbands and brothers and just like the men in your life, and it really kind of, I don't know, it just like really struck me with like how privileged we are to be born in like this particular moment in time,
Mhm.
and even to be like at a particular age now to be involved in crypto.
Totally,
I
totally.
I'm like always so, yeah, I'm always so conscious of it, and I find myself saying like since I've been in crypto like for the last couple of months, I would say I'm like shocked at how often I say it out loud. Like I'm so lucky, like I'm so grateful, because it's the kind of thing that you like hear on an Oprah episode, like keep
And
a
you're like,
gratitude journal. But
absolutely. I know, I know. Um,
but,
hey, we've
but yeah.
bonded about this. Like it's hey, like acknowledging the things you're grateful for is so real. And
Hmm.
it just makes the experience so much more enriching and beautiful. And I think like not to be cheesy, but like so great. Like I've met my best friend through
Hmm.
crypto. There are people that have met, partners and like big friend groups through crypto. And
Hmm.
I think like it attracts a certain personality. It attracts people that want change and are okay with
Hmm.
change. And I think that that's rattling for a lot of other people.
Right.
I've had friends that like totally reject the idea and they're like, I'm never gonna like use this thing. Like I'm never using a wallet. This is so scary. Like blah, I'm
Hmm.
done, and that's fine. But I think with even like the traditional evolution of technology, there were people that resisted it, and that comes with the risk of being left behind. And okay, maybe
Hmm.
you're okay with that, but I'm super grateful to be at the forefront. I definitely consider this the forefront of stuff, and yeah, man, just yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, that totally resonates with me, and yeah, I think that just this access to people, and it's so strange how like in the physical world, like being in the room, is such a big deal. Like being in the physical room, it's really hard to get into. Like we've talked about, like you need all these credentials potentially, like
Mhm.
access with maybe like financial wealth and other things, location, um, and then there are kind of like a range of other factors that can affect how accessible opportunities are to you. And it's so incredible with crypto that I feel like we've both had experiences that have confirmed that if you take the leap, like the community will catch you. And is that like how you think about it? And would you kind of, if someone was like sitting on the edge of like crypto, was maybe in Web 2, or kind of thinking about whether to really like engage with the community, would you kind of like encourage them and like tell them to take the leap, or are there kind of warnings that you would like a tag to the advice, or yeah, how do you think about that?
So first of all, I think there is a privilege of who you know in the space. I think that's a thing. Um, as it is with any community, the like quality of people you know, what they do, can impact the things you go to, what you're associated with, what opportunities you hear about first, etc. So that's not, not present in crypto. It's totally a thing. I recognize that because of, the places I've worked at and the timing, I do have some of that privilege. But I do think there are people thinking about how to make this kind of not be a thing in the space. So like Hudson Jameson, good friend, put out a tweet about kind of getting a conference together with people that are not Web3 native and kind of new to the space and spotlighting them. I think that's great. And I think that's, a way to kind of reduce this barrier of like who you know, where you were, kind of social cachet that kind of goes on in crypto. Kernel is a great initiative, very much in the vein of that as well, where it's like, okay, we recognize it's kind of about who you know and what you know. And so let's like get together and kind of learn together and have the safe space to ask the dumb questions. There's no dumb questions, but ask the dumb questions and like feel okay doing that. Of course, there's countless initiatives like SheFi, all these educational programs, all these kind of hackathons, ETH Global, that encourage kind of newcomers to the space to engage. But I think there's a lot of good stuff going on, but it's also like hard to know about any of this. And so when people ask me the question of like, okay, how do I get involved? What do I do? There's the traditional like, okay, if you have a project, like apply for a grant, go through, a networks or protocols foundation arm and do the dance and do the thing. But there's also like, okay, if you just want a safe space, like there are countless amounts of resources that you can engage with and make friends and have this community to ask these questions and start building relationships. Because I really do think it's all about, your reputation in the space, what you've done, and like who you know and the products you've been associated with, which I think is slowly starting to change, but it does help.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that kind of the friends that we make along the way, it's amazing how much they kind of color our experience. And I think this is just in life, which is like, you experience life as it is like kind of reflected back to you through the people that are around you. And so I can imagine going through, I mean, it's funny because like I was like around in 2017, but like a complete island. I didn't know how to kind of get involved and how to find people, and to really kind of connect beyond a superficial level. And that has been so different to like this experience that I've had where I feel like, oh no, these are like really my people. Like I have friends here, and it's really completely changed my experience. And it's so exciting. And I hope, I mean, I'm so grateful that this like wave of people who have not only been in the space like yourself for many years, but also like a lot of the people who have just come into the space recently seem to have this like very open and inclusive attitude. It's so surprising. I always think this, which is, I think I heard Stani from Ave talking about like DMing people if you're not sure what to do or if you're interested in a role and things like that, and how job descriptions aren't such a thing in Web3, and it's phenomenal if you go through. I was going to make it like a tweet or a thread, but I didn't want to like trash people's DMs. But the number of people who are founders of protocols or who are really involved with projects in crypto who have open DMs is phenomenal, right?
Yeah, I mean, what is LinkedIn anymore, right? It's like a shit posting like LinkedIn hustler spot where you're like, I read 10 books in a day and like whatever. No shade on LinkedIn, but it's very important. But like, yeah, I mean, I think a lot more people, which is people know this and it's a done and dusted statement, but a lot of people are finding jobs on Twitter. A lot of people are finding jobs working for DAOs, multiple DAOs, and they're able to sustain. A lot of people are making their, monthly income playing Axie Infinity, and like that's cool. Like, okay, great. And so, like, I think there's the idea of a job has changed a little bit with this ecosystem because it's like, yeah, you can work full time for multiple DAOs and like that can be your job, or you can be a gamer and like that is your job, and you're like breeding and like, okay, like that's your like thing, right? You're breeding in the metaverse, or you can manage different token gated communities and like that's the thing. And so I think the idea of a job has evolved a little bit, but also the idea of getting a job and how the process of how to get a job has also changed, where it's, I asked couple of good questions on Discord. I hopped on a call and like, oh, one thing led to another. Here I am talking to the CEO and like, oh, got a job offer. And I think some of those frameworks are really hard for people like in our parents' generation to understand. Like my mom is so like, like these things just are so hard for people from the previous generation to like wrap their brains around. And I think like that's again the privilege of like a little bit of ageist privilege where your brain is malleable, you're able to think young, and you're saying, okay, this could work, and there's merit to this, and you don't have to go through this traditional like whatever like finance recruitment pipeline, get hired at Morgan Stanley, go to private equity. I don't know what they do, but like that might not be the path that someone takes, and like there's merit and value to that. And so yeah, I think going back to this idea of privilege, there's a lot of like technical like privilege around like the knowledge of the technology and what it does, the social privilege, and also like just being at the right place at the right time and having the right attitude.
Totally.
I think helps. Like, but again, the space, at least from my experience, like the space has always attracted people that are open to this, and if it hasn't, or in the cases where I've seen that not be the case, like those people leave the space.
Yeah. It's so interesting how it's just like a self-filtering ecosystem at this stage still, even though I think there has been like a significant amount of growth in the last 12 months.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how I mean, I'm so excited, and I'm so grateful that this feels so real for me. I think like you, like to the point where I can't imagine, I don't know, I just like can't imagine what the alternative reality would be like if this wasn't it. And just grateful to be here.
Yeah, I don't know. I do think what helps some of the legitimacy is like generally like the cycle of market maturation that we're at, which is like something I said in the beginning of this. Like we are at a point where, NFTs have been around for a while. Like we've been doing the dance for a while. Like Simon De La Riviere has been like posting like, Medium articles about this since like 2017. Like it's been a thing, right? That like
Incredible.
Paul Cole has, like we've all been talking about it. But now you're seeing brands and you're seeing musicians and you're seeing people of certain, social stature adopt this. You're seeing Christie's, you're seeing Sotheby's, consider this as an official form of art or form of expression. And of course there is this like element of, it's very Dadaist, Duchampianist, like, is this really art? Is this really legit kind of attitude in these spaces? But I think we're at a point where we're ready for that kind of adoption, and like clearly we're seeing it. And I think we're in a similar kind of operating space with kind of the DAO movement, where like it's been around for a while, but it's like something that is now catching on. And we're kind of in this like the hockey stick kind of phase of growth. Yeah, and I think like we're learning the same things we learned with like the ICO stuff in 2017, right? Like there was a lot of criticism around like, what is there's criticism on the primitive level where it was like, what is a TCR? You know, what is this thing? What is a universal login? Like, why are we doing these things? What do these primitives mean? And then there was also criticism around like, hey, like, let's evaluate the like security and like legitimacy of this thing, and like, what are we evaluating these things against? Like, how are we making sure things are secure, and like, how are we making sure things are stable on the infrastructure layer? And I think a lot of those same learnings are coming out of the the NFT space now, and I think soon to be the DAO space, NFTs in particular, where it's like, okay, like, what does it mean for this metadata to be stored on IPFS? What does it mean for this metadata to be, being pulled from somewhere? Like, what it, there's the perfect example is, I'll find you the Twitter thread at some point, but this guy had an OpenSea storefront, and he like rugged all of his end users that purchased his NFT with like literal pictures of rugs. So he like changed the image on it. And like, that is something that can happen. And so like that's also, I think like that's a natural evolution of a lot of these like crypto trends where things take off, but then they're kind of scrutinized or evaluated on the technical and primitive level. And I think NFTs are very much in that place. And I think, of course, DAOs will get there with DAOs. ZK stuff, I think, will be a big thing. Identity and reputation is huge. And I think we're already seeing some kind of scrutiny and deep thinking about that stuff now as well.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting just like model to kind of have in your head and refer to, and which is just like this idea of market maturation and just zooming out, because it's so easy, right? When you're in the day-to-day kind of motions with crypto, you feel like so zoomed into like the single thing that you're doing, and it's easy to kind of forget that if you zoom out, like we're at this point on the on the hockey stick or the curve or whatever it is. And so, I think that's really valuable.
Yeah. I'm excited. Every day, I wake up excited, which is already a testament to the fact that I'm doing the right thing. I'm feeling good. So yeah, I think, we can do a much better job at, kind of rethinking a lot of these like educational kind of growth mechanisms that we have working right now. And like, I think this is just a natural product of learning and building in public, where there is discourse on what can be better. There is discourse on the security of stuff. There is discourse on, how can this be done better in a more efficient way? And I think, a lot of this from the growth perspective is just questions around, how do we encourage quality and quantity while maintaining this attitude of like doing things in public, staying reputationally safe, and of course welcoming all outsiders and being as accessible as possible.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really optimistic because I feel like we'll look back in like 10 to 15 years and think, oh, of course it was like crypto that was the environment that allowed for this paradigm shift, and now we do things differently. And so again, it's like just like zooming out, even just like from the crypto market, I guess, into like a different time scale of like what we're talking about with like education and kind of humanity over like the last couple of like decades/centuries. And so I'm really excited. Thank you so much for your time today. I know that we ran over and I feel like I could talk to you for another hour.
Thank you for having me. This was amazing.